How would I say oh my god hey if I was from Sheffield? Honestly, I am self-aware enough to realise how southern I am, like I could basically see France on a good day. Oh my god hey, welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. My name is Mickey Joe and I am obsessed with all things theatre, which is why I am a theatre-themed content creator here on social media. You can also find me on Instagram, TikTok, all of the other places, and I'm also a professional theatre critic in the UK. I get invited to go and see shows and then I make video reviews about them here on YouTube. And today we're going to be talking about Standing at the Sky's Edge, a new musical which has just opened at the Gillian Lynne Theatre in London. The show arrives in the West End having already won last year's Olivier Award for Best New Musical, which it won for its run at the National Theatre. That previous iteration of the show opened almost exactly a year ago and I reviewed it there. If you want, you can go and see my video review about it on my channel. And as a heads up, I don't often re-review shows, especially in cases where my feelings haven't really shifted or developed all that much. And broadly, I do feel the same way about Standing at the Sky's Edge now that it's in the West End compared with how I felt about it at the National, but it does have a very different principal cast, so we're going to be talking about them in some detail today, as well as a couple of new thoughts and feelings and inferences I have about the show. But it would also be remiss of me not to mention that the show started its life at the Sheffield Crucible. This is a production very much set in Sheffield, written by Sheffield-based writers, and it very much authentically pays tribute to the city. So any praise that I pile on to the West End production of Standing at the Sky's Edge is really praise for the UK's regional theatres. Very important that we remember that. And if you enjoy this show and you want to see more theatre like this making its way to London, it's vitally important that we support those regional theatres that act as the pipeline to the nation's capital. Or in many instances, just programme great work that doesn't go on to a further life, and that is still enough. In any case, if you enjoyed today's video review, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for many more reviews coming soon of West End and Broadway shows. Make sure to turn on the notifications so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos. Finally, if you have had the chance to see Standing at the Sky's Edge, either at the Sheffield Crucible, at the National Theatre, or now at its new home at the Gillian Lynne, let me know what you thought of it in the comments section down below. I love reading all of your responses. If you agreed with me, if you disagreed with me, weigh in. What did you think of this piece of theatre? For now though, let's talk about what I thought of Standing at the Sky's Edge in the West End. So let me tell you a little bit more about Standing at the Sky's Edge. Unless you've already seen it, there's a good chance you may not actually know what this show is about. It's not based on a book or a film or a TV series. It is the work of a brilliant writer named Chris Bush, who, as I understand it, was commissioned to create this piece with the setting of the iconic Park Hill housing estate in Sheffield already chosen as a topic, and with the back catalogue of musician Richard Hawley already connected to it as well. And that is essentially an overview of what this show is. It is a story about three different generations whose lives unfold simultaneously in front of our eyes across various different decades in one particular flat on the iconic Park Hill housing estate in Sheffield, a housing estate that is first created with so much promise for the working class, whose downturn in the subsequent decades is emblematic of the political effect on the country, and whose 2000s rebirth and regeneration provokes intriguing and important conversations about gentrification. And like I said, the show combines this original script from Chris Bush with the existing music from Richard Hawley, making it functionally a jukebox musical, though it doesn't bear much of a strong similarity to the others in that genre. Not only because we're not telling the biographical story of any particular musician, but also because the relationship that this show has to its music is a little bit different. If you've seen the musical Girl from the North Country, which utilises the songs of Bob Dylan, it probably bears the closest resemblance to that, because we have this very detailed, very nuanced script, and then when we go into a musical number, what happens is we just pause the narrative and we capitalise on the emotion that has just been established for the past however many 5 to 10 minutes, and then the songs will sort of riff on that emotional idea while neither propelling us forwards with added information nor being lyrically specific about the characters or circumstances. More on my thoughts about that in the next section. But before I tell you what I think of this show, if I have you at all curious about the narrative, let me tell you a little bit more about the characters that we encounter. Like I said, the action is unfolding simultaneously across 3 different time periods. First, in the 1960s through 1970s, we have a young couple moving into the newly opened flats with a huge amount of hope for their future together. Both of them have very much come from a working class background. They're hoping to start a family together. He works in steel, and the decades that follow will not be kind to the people in those kinds of lines of work, especially as we approach the years of government under Margaret Thatcher. The next residents of that same flat, in I believe the very late 1980s, are 2 siblings and their younger cousin who have immigrated to the country from Liberia. Obviously moving to the city under very different circumstances, what they have in common is this sort of a shared optimism for their future there. They are arriving with hope. And predominantly it's this younger cousin that we focus on, Joy. She is initially hugely reluctant to build any kind of a life in Sheffield. She wants to be reunited with her parents. She wants to go back home. All of this begins to change when she meets a young boy who is wandering around the development. Finally, in the 2000s, a young woman named Poppy has just purchased one of the newly refurbished flats, having moved from London, completely upheaving her entire life for personal reasons that will emerge. And she does share that same hope, but we definitely glimpse it through a filter of anxiety and concern. She is very much trying to acquaint herself with the city and with her neighbours and with the people at her workplace. All of this to take control of her own life after a demonstrably bad breakup with her psycho ex, Nikki. And there's plenty that ties these stories together, not least of all these themes of aspiration and what it is that home represents. And it manages simultaneously to be a story about people while also being a story about this building. It's very much a character in this narrative, one that we see adapting and changing just as much as its inhabitants do. So having told you a little bit more about this show, let me tell you what I thought of it. So I will happily say, I think that Standing at the Sky's Edge is a fantastic piece of theatre. It's a unique piece of theatre, and as well as being a particularly winning combination of different things, combining Chris's script with Richard's music and the whole concept of the show, I think the real brilliance and genius of it is the script by Chris Bush. It is so well written. Aside from anything else, it's just a fantastic play. One that circles in on its key themes after a careful orbit approached from 3 different sides, using these different generations, highlighting the differences between them, but more often than not, their commonalities. This is present not only in the writing, but in the direction by Robert Hasty, in so many striking moments where these characters from different years are sharing this space on stage, allowing us as an audience to note a kinship in their tensions, their aspirations, their anxieties. And back to Chris's script, one of the things I love the most about it is that it doesn't fall into cliche. All of these characters take different routes to the ones that you might expect them to. I love when we meet Poppy, for example, the most modern of our characters, and this is going to be a teensy little spoiler, but you find it out fairly quickly. We come to find out that the relationship that she is fleeing is a queer one, that it's a lesbian relationship, and she hasn't really been introduced to us as a stereotypically queer character, which I appreciate, although I will say some of her sort of neuroses do make more sense after that revelation. But this is a show that, in multiple characters, gives you a really just authentic and down-to-earth LGBTQ plus representation, which is fantastic, and also isn't exclusive to its later years. That's important as well. Another slight spoiler here, in our earliest story with the characters of Rose and Harry, there is a moment where the 2 of them are fighting because she has asked one of his friends if he has any leads on any potential work for him, and Harry is very against asking. He has too much pride to accept what he perceives as charity, and when he confronts his wife about this, she refuses to accept any blame for this whatsoever. She is unapologetic about having asked for this and tries to motivate him into returning to the workforce. We've seen relationships like this depicted in media before, particularly in this time period, where the women are characterized as being much more submissive, and I think Rose is a character all the more powerful for flying in the face of that. Then you have Joy and her cousins in this middle generation, and there is so much complexity to their relationship and the layers of their relationship, how her older female cousin becomes this authoritative maternal figure in her life in the absence of her parents, and the strain that this puts on their relationship that you see carried forwards for years. Joy, I think, is also one of the show's most interesting characters, as we see her changing after her arrival to Sheffield. Not only does her accent gradually shift throughout the show, so do her priorities, so do her aspirations, both because of who she is affected by and by the circumstances that affect them both. And this, like I've said, is a tribute to the fantastic writing of Chris Bush. The characters are so layered, and there's such an authenticity to the whole thing. And by taking this wide-scoped an approach, you get a really strong sense of the city. You know, we see it over like 50, 60 years. There is a political element to the narrative because we experience these various different political flashpoints and the extent to which they do affect some of the show's characters and the extent to which they barely affect others of the show's characters. That's not really talked about, but it's very telling to consider. And alongside this conversation about what it is that home means to us and means to a person, one of the themes most powerfully evoked in the show is one about class disparity. And this is one that Chris Bush writes about astonishingly well. Her play Hungry that I saw at the Edinburgh Fringe just still lingers in my mind. And that took the approach of a two-person play with this very distinct class disparity between the two characters. What we get in Standing at the Sky's Edge is various different levels, in which there is both legitimate and bad faith criticism of characters from different class backgrounds. It's really thought-provoking. It is also the product of a brilliant creative team. The direction by Robert Hastie that takes all of these unruly elements and these various different years and this vast ensemble of performers, this enormous set designed by Ben Stones, which we're going to come back to because, my God, the focus with which Rob Hastie pulls all of this together and manages to whip up these peaks of relevance and thematic importance and ultimately keeps us at momentum and then slows us down to achieve this beautiful stillness. It's such a beautifully managed tone and pace throughout. It's incredibly well directed. The way that the show fosters this hopeful joy and then sort of peppers in intrigue that stirs into a tension that melts away to create this sorrow. It's beautiful, as is the work of Ben Stones. My goodness, Ben Stones, who did the costume and the set design, but it's the set that I really want to talk about because you have this incredible brutalist structure. I believe it's been a slightly different adaptation of this set in every venue they've visited because the auditoria and the playing spaces have been very different. The set, I will say, is very cleverly embellished with beautiful lighting details from lighting designer Mark Henderson, but we have these multiple levels, we have walkways and bridges going across in the background. It evokes and depicts the Park Hill estate very accurately and very meaningfully, and in a way that is very dramatically capable. We have the band split across two of the central levels. We have this neon feature on the right-hand side that was an actual feature of the Park Hill housing estate. If you've ever visited Sheffield and you've walked between the Sheffield train station and the Crucible Theatre, chances are, if you look out over the horizon, you will see this housing estate, and you can see what was graffiti on one of these walkways that has now been turned into a neon sign. This is the thing, if you're wandering on the artwork, that says, "I love you, will you marry me?" I also must mention Lynn Page's choreography. It's not a hugely dance-heavy show, but there are some very striking moments of movement and of choreography. The closest that this comes to dance with a capital D is during the song Cole's Corner, which is just a haunting piece of music to begin with, beautifully written. It's sung by the character of Joy, who is longing to go dancing with her boyfriend, and as she is singing this, we see all of these couples dancing around her on the stage and in the dress circle level of the theatre and in the middle of the stalls. I love the way that the show, already being vast on this stage, spills out into the auditorium. This, if you're wondering, is the same theatre where Bad Cinderella, before it was bad, when it was just Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella, this is where it was in the West End, and it had the whole spinning seats feature. They don't utilise this for this particular show, but the staging does find exciting new ways to be expansive. And this particular Cole's Corner choreography moment has a slowness to it that it almost feels like we're watching dancers twirling around in slow motion, like a couple of ballerinas in a music box. My favourite piece of choreography or movement comes, I believe, during the song Midnight Train. insane. And without giving too much of the plot away in this review, it comes on the heels of a scene in which a young couple are both working shifts at sort of different antisocial hours while trying to raise a young child, and they don't get to see much of each other. And the visual that we build here uses more and more of the show's ensemble to show them sort of walking back and forth around different areas of this set, walking towards a doorway, reversing away from it, walking towards the doorway again. It's representative, I think, of the idea of people making these daily commutes, the sort of drudgery of the working life, the grey monotony that comes with going out the door, coming home again, going out the door and coming home again. And as this builds and we see it continuing across the stage, we can see the character of Rose, played by Rachel Wooding, who in this moment is grappling with a very difficult personal decision. We see her walking in one direction, turning and sort of questioning it. And that, I think, is such an interesting detail in the staging of this song, because the steps that she is consistently trying to take there and repeating mean something very different to her. So that in the next scene, when we see her walking into the living room and making an announcement that this was something that she'd been building up to but was finding it hard to do, we already know that because we've seen it transpiring. And without completely spoiling this show for you, I will say if you've seen it before, it's very much worth a revisit, because there are so many little details in Robert Hasty's direction where characters are sort of acknowledging each other. I'm going to say one last big spoiler, and if you don't want it, you can skip ahead to the next section because this is only going to be a brief little idea. But I was so incredibly taken with this moment where Jimmy, in the middle of the three narratives, sort of acknowledges or perceives the arrival of his father, Harry, in the previous one, when he is walking on and sitting down, at this point drunk and unemployed and unfulfilled and remorseful and feeling sorry for himself. And this type of moment is just what I love about theatre, because what we as an audience are looking at is Jimmy seeing his father and reacting to that. But what's actually happening for him as a character is it's representing the memory of his father, and that's one of the things that's motivating him in that moment. Meanwhile, I'm just watching this and thinking, God, theatre's just cool. Theatre's just so cool. When we can achieve stuff like that, it's just brilliant. For all of this praise, however, Standing at the Sky's Edge remains for me a fantastic piece of theatre with a capital T and a 4-star musical with a lowercase m. Let me tell you why. So 4 stars might be a surprise after all of the positives that I have just piled onto this show, and there has always been one prevailing issue in this piece for me, and that is its relationship to its music. Because for me to consider this a fantastic book musical, it would need to have a more specific score. My issue is that there is so much detail in the scenes, in the character. Chris Bush's writing is so brilliant, so astonishing, so character-driven, so incisive, and so emotionally articulate that when we arrive at these non-specific songs, it can feel frustrating. Not only that, but we then have a little bit of a pacing issue in terms of the narrative because everything slows right down. We can't explain anything, we can't progress the story in any kind of direction. All we do is, like I said in the beginning, we take the emotion of that 6-minute scene and we just play it in a song. The scenes are complex and multi-layered and nuanced, and then the songs just manage to hit one adjective. Perhaps we spent 8 minutes building up to the idea of something sad, and so we sing for 5 minutes about sadness. And for these characters, what I've compared these songs to before is it's like when you're really upset about something and so you go and like sit in your car or you listen to a song and you angrily sing along. The lyrics that you're singing aren't specific to your situation, but they allow you to access that emotion regardless. So what we end up with is a personal specific script and songs that kind of give you accompanying vibes. And I still think the music is very necessary to this. I don't think it would be as strong a piece of theatre if you were to just strip the entire score away. Nor do I necessarily disagree with the choice to use Richard Hawley's music. I just think it's a limiting factor inherently. Because in many of these instances, you do start to yearn for these characters characters to be a little bit more emotionally articulate through song about each other and about their circumstances. Don't get me wrong, some of the pairings of songs with characters and scenes are so brilliant and come together so well. When Rose sings After the Rain at the very end of the show, it's so powerful, it's perfect, it doesn't need to say anything else. Cole's Corner is another brilliant example of this. Comparatively, I struggle more with For Your Lover Give Some Time, just because elements of the lyric do seem to fly a little in the face of the scene that has just transpired. We have a character who is not expressing their regret or their ability to change their behavior, and then they sing a song about how they will, and then they don't. That entire sequence with that song also goes on for a very long time, and in general, this is also a long running time. That's because we have a lot of narrative to get through, and the narrative has to stop every time there's a song. If the songs helped to move the plot forwards, then the show would probably be about 20 minutes shorter, and in fairness, the first act probably ought to be about 10 minutes shorter. There are certain sequences that we get in that first act that just continue to add flavour and colour and depth that aren't strictly necessary to the plot. Another sort of vague musical moment is the deployment of the title song, which opens the second act. You get a lot of angst and power, and it sounds fantastic, but it doesn't strictly mean that much. The end of the first act, meanwhile, which I didn't tell you about in the last section, everything is whipped into this frenzy. We have chaos happening on stage visually, we have smoke billowing out, we have things being thrown across. It's evocative of a riot. That's a really visually striking sequence, and that's something else that the show does manage to do when the songs are a little more emotionally inarticulate. The creative team have come up with these brilliant visual sequences that allow us a little bit more narrative momentum in spite of that. But for now, let me tell you about this show's performances. So I mentioned that this was a very different principal cast to the previous production. Some are the same. Rachel Wooding has continued in the show as Rose, and she gives a beautiful performance in this. She is fully ready to have some really meaty leading lady roles after being sort of a supporting asset to many productions, and being used as a phenomenal vocalist, which she is. She is such a strong actress. The fragility that she battles against in this show, those moments of heartbreak that she refuses to be comforted through, and then this final beautiful vocal performance. She's just absolutely astonishing in this, and heartbreaking really is the word, but her strength throughout the thing is majestic. Now, Joel Harper Jackson has joined this production playing her husband Harry, and I do think, especially in the beginning, it is characterized very well. He sounds fantastic singing these songs. He really gets the emotive thing of singing this particular style of music and finding a way of infusing meaning into it. What I didn't really get as much from his performance is the way that his character sort of decays over time. I don't know that he felt emotionally bruised or withdrawn enough. I sort of needed him to be a little more inarticulate. If he's drunk, a little more drunk. If he's weary, a little more of that. But he was almost just a little too sprightly, a little too youthful. Also new to this run of the show was Elizabeth Iodell as Joy, and she had big shoes to step into, but she did just as remarkable a job at playing this very complex character. Again, lots of heartbreak, lots of vulnerability, but one far more on her sleeve. Lots of beauty to this performance as well. Hers is definitely the character arc that experiences the most change throughout the show, and all of those very careful, very subtle shifts, very well played, very believably played. Now, I must also mention Charlene Hector, who's also joined the production for this run, who was playing Joy's cousin Grace. And she manages to find comic beats amongst this sternness and the selflessness, but then sort of the personal angst of her circumstance. She's turned this character for me into a really compelling supporting player in this narrative. She also, as a very experienced vocalist prior to her theatrical career, sang the first line of Standing at the Sky's Edge in the opening of the second act and gave us a delicious vocal. Also returning to the show was Samuel Jordan as Jimmy. His vocal performances, top notch, but his acting moments opposite Elizabeth Iodell as Joy. Again, we see him mature and change and evolve, and just brilliant work from him, especially in the final scene that he plays in the show. It's just very, very well done. Moving forward then to the last time period of the show, Laura Pitt-Pulford is a new member of this cast for this production, and she is once again every bit the radiant force that we have known her to be on stage. She is funny and light-hearted and neurotic, obviously singing beautifully, but it's the reactions to all of the other characters around her through which we really begin to glimpse her. We're so often seeing her nursing an enormous glass of white wine as she's trying to contend with passive-aggressive comments made by her parents, or sort of awkward small talk with new friends and colleagues. Her mother in particular, who is played by Nicola Sloan, is a wonderful presence in all of the scenes that she is in. She's a brilliant comic presence, and again manages to create real brilliant moments out of these very brief asides and facial expressions. In a separate role as one of Poppy's colleagues and New Year's Eve party guests, she also gets one of the best lines in the show. I'm not going to spoil it on here, but if you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. In these scenes of the show, we also meet Mel Lowe, who is playing an estate agent whose significance to the story gets revealed towards the end of the show. I spent much of this trying to work out where I recognised Mel from, and it's from the play Hungry that I mentioned before that I'd seen at the Edinburgh Fringe. They were so brilliant and urgent and compelling in that. And it stands to reason that what I enjoyed from them in this production is the scenes where they are playing their character of Connie the estate agent. What I found myself a little more emotionally disconnected from are the scenes in which that same character serves as a narrator, with these sort of pseudo-poetic interludes between the different scenes, talking about like, oh, there's a storm coming and I don't like the look of that sky, and what do? Do you stick or do you switch? Aside from anything else, they aren't particularly my favourite parts of the script. And though all of the acting that we're seeing on stage is very gritty and naturalistic and very like ITV crime drama, I think for those sections to work they need a little more scale and profundity and grandeur perhaps. Finally, one of the most interesting new additions to the cast for the Gillian Lynne run is Lauren Redding, who has replaced Maimouna Menon, who was Olivier Award nominated for this supporting role when it was at the National Theatre, whose performance I really loved. And what I love about Lauren's is that it's also brilliant but completely different. Lauren has not only a very different voice to Maimouna, but a very different take on this character that now is Liverpudlian and also hilarious. Like, there are so many comedy moments while still having the requisite depth, while still talking about, you know, the heavy topics that she talks about in the show. That does very well in setting her up to be this slightly misguided ambassador for the working class who is repeating things that she's read from Wikipedia, who is subsequently corrected by someone with a lot more lived experience. But every moment she's on stage, there's a particular intonation with which she delivers all of the lines that has this inherent guilt to it and has this inherent awkwardness, because she knows that every time she's arrived that it's a bad idea and it's not really defensible, but we're told that this character is one who is deeply passionate and believes in this very romantic idea of love, and that absolutely makes sense with Lauren's interpretation of the character also. But as you can see, the sun has absolutely set since I started filming this video. I've been sat here for some time, and those are basically all of my thoughts about Standing at the Sky's Edge. I'm going to stop myself because I could keep talking about this show. It is so rich, it is so deep, it is so detailed. I could just pull out specific things that I love about it. I would much rather hear what you have to say and encourage you to go and see this show for yourselves if you haven't already. This is not a show that is filled with star casting. It's not based on a film, like I said. This is not one of the West End's easiest sells. It is, however, a groundbreaking, exciting, pulsating, award-winning piece of musical theatre. You should absolutely go and check it out at the Gillian Lynne Theatre in London. Thank you so much for watching this review. I hope that you have enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for many more reviews and other theatre videos coming very soon. Hit the notifications button so you don't miss out on any new content. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!